The most common unwritten rule of life is one most people quietly break is listening not to understand, but to respond. You've probably felt it. You're talking, explaining something real, and the other person is already forming their reply. Not out of malice, just habit. It's how most of us were taught to communicate, respond quickly, have a point, make it count. But the real power in a conversation isn't in having the next word. It's in giving someone the space to finish theirs. Listening to understand means dropping the need to be right or clever. It's about tuning in, not just to what's said, but how it's said. The pace, the tension, the pauses. That's where the meaning lives. Take a simple example. Someone says, "Work's been overwhelming lately." A response-driven habit kicks in. "Ugh, same here." The topic bounces back to you. But a more generous move would be to stay with them. "What's been going on?" That small difference shifts the whole tone, from competition to connection. Psychologically, this kind of listening creates safety. It lowers defenses. It builds trust. When someone truly feels heard, they don't need to raise their voice or repeat themselves. They relax. They open up. And they carry that moment with them. Because they weren't just answered. They were understood. Try to make win-win always. Most people enter disagreements thinking someone has to lose, that if one side gets more, the other gets less. But that assumption leaves something on the table, the chance to make it work for both sides. The idea of a win-win outcome isn't just business jargon, it's rooted in psychology and human behavior. It reflects a mindset that values cooperation over competition and long-term outcomes over short-term wins. At its core, it's about problem solving in a way that benefits everyone involved, rather than framing every situation as a contest. Let's take a simple example. Two roommates argue over who gets the larger bedroom. If one insists on winning, the other feels shortchanged. But what if they reframe the conversation? One takes the bigger room and pays slightly more rent, or the other chooses a better closet or workspace. It's not perfect symmetry, but both walk away feeling considered and respected. Psychologically, this approach taps into fairness, autonomy, and intrinsic motivation. People are more cooperative when they feel heard, more generous when they aren't being cornered. And win-win thinking tends to produce creative solutions. Ideas that wouldn't emerge if the goal was just to outmaneuver the other person. It also builds trust over time. When people see you aiming for mutual benefit, not just your own advantage, they're more likely to return the gesture. And that builds relationships where outcomes improve by default, not by force. Trying to make win-win isn't always easy. It takes effort, flexibility, and the patience to understand someone else's needs. But when it works, it does more than solve problems. It changes how people see you and how you see the world. Compliment effort, not just outcome. When someone accomplishes something impressive, it's easy to say, "You're so talented," or "That turned out perfectly." But there's a deeper kind of praise, one that focuses not just on what they did, but how hard they worked to do it. The psychology behind compliment effort, not just outcome, is rooted in growth mindset theory. Developed by psychologist Carol Dweck, it explains how people respond to success and failure based on the kind of feedback they receive. When we praise results alone, people often start to link their value to the end product. But when we recognize effort, it encourages resilience, persistence, and long-term motivation. For example, if a student gets a high grade and you say, "You must be really smart," the praise attaches to something they can't control. But if you say, "You must have worked hard on this," the focus shifts to the process, the strategy, time, and focus they applied. This matters because outcomes don't always reflect the full picture. Someone might work incredibly hard and still not win. Complimenting the effort tells them their work mattered, even if the final result didn't go their way. It builds confidence that's based on input, not just luck or natural ability. This applies far beyond academics. Telling a friend, "I can see how much thought you put into this," or a colleague, "I noticed how carefully you handled that situation," reinforces behaviors they chose, not just results they achieved. Effort-based praise supports emotional well-being because it's rooted in something people can keep doing. It rewards the process, not just the moment. And that helps people stay motivated, learn from setbacks, and take pride in how they show up, even when the outcome is still unfolding. Own your slice of the mess first. This idea comes from principles in conflict resolution and behavioral psychology. In any disagreement, responsibility is almost never one-sided. But conversations go nowhere when both people focus only on defending themselves. When you start by acknowledging your own part, however small, it lowers defensiveness and opens the door to progress. Psychologically, this works because it activates something called reciprocity. When one person shows vulnerability or takes responsibility, the other person is more likely to do the same. It shifts the dynamic from opposition to collaboration. Here's what it looks like in real life. Say you and a coworker had a tense exchange. Instead of opening with, "You misunderstood me," you might say, "I realize I interrupted you, and that probably didn't help." That simple act of ownership changes the tone. It shows emotional maturity, and it earns trust. This applies to personal relationships too. Telling a partner, "I got defensive, and I shouldn't have," often softens the ground for a more honest conversation. Even if you think the other person's role was bigger, naming your part first makes it more likely they'll reflect on theirs. Owning your slice doesn't mean taking the blame for everything. It just means going first and focusing on what you control. It signals that you're here to understand, not just to be right. And in many cases, that one small admission is what turns a standstill into a breakthrough. Mirror feelings first. Fixes can wait. A friend says, "I'm just so tired of everything right now." And before they finish, you're already listing things they could try. More sleep, a walk, maybe a vacation. It's automatic. But in that moment, what they really needed was something else, to feel understood. The idea behind mirror feelings first, fixes can wait, is simple but powerful. When people share emotional struggles, their first need isn't usually advice, it's validation. That means showing that you've heard their feelings, not just their words. Mirroring feelings doesn't mean repeating everything back like a robot. It means naming or reflecting the emotion they're expressing in a calm, clear way. If someone says, "I feel stuck," a mirrored response might be, "That sounds really frustrating." No suggestions yet. Just acknowledgement. What this does is lower emotional resistance. When someone feels seen and understood, they're more open to conversation and, even later, problem solving. If you skip this step and go straight into, "Here's what to do," it can come off as dismissive, even if your intentions are good. Psychologically, this taps into a basic human need, emotional validation. We all want to know that what we're feeling makes sense to someone else. When that happens, the brain starts to calm down, making people more able to process their thoughts and consider next steps. Mirroring feelings isn't complicated, but it takes awareness. You're listening not just for facts, but for tone, energy, and emotion. It's a pause before the plan. And that small pause can change the whole direction of a conversation for the better. Keep your humor fresh. There's a reason the same joke gets a laugh once and an eye roll the third time. Humor relies on surprise, and repetition kills surprise. In psychology, this is tied to what's called habituation, the brain's tendency to stop reacting to things it's seen before. A fresh joke activates attention and reward systems. A stale one, it gets filtered out like background noise. That's not just about punchlines. It applies to tone, timing, and even self-deprecating bits we fall back on. When people use the same lines over and over, at work, in conversations, or online, it can feel safe, predictable. But it also risks becoming a performance that disconnects instead of connecting. Because people don't just laugh at jokes. They respond to novelty, presence, and relevance. Fresh humor isn't about being clever all the time. It's about noticing. What's happening right now in this moment? What small absurdity just happened that only we noticed together? That's where humor lands best, when it's alive. Think of it like improv, not stand-up. You're not reciting something polished. You're responding to the room, the energy, the weirdness of reality. That's why the same friend can make you laugh in a dozen different ways, because they're in the moment with you, not recycling the greatest hits. So when humor feels tired or automatic, it might be a sign to update your lens. What used to work might not anymore, and that's okay. Humor evolves with you. Keeping it fresh isn't just about being funny. It's about being real, being attentive, and choosing connection over routine. Prioritize presence over ping. You're in the middle of a conversation and your phone lights up. Just a quick glance. Nothing urgent, but somehow the moment has already shifted. This is what psychologists call attention residue. When a part of your focus remains stuck in the last thing you saw or heard, even after you've returned to the conversation. The brain tries to multitask, but it doesn't do it well. Instead, it switches rapidly, losing depth in both places. Prioritize presence over pings means choosing to be where you are, not just physically, but mentally. It's about resisting the tiny alerts, buzzes, and background distractions that pull you away from the people in front of you. In an age where everything competes for attention, notifications, news feeds, group chats, being fully present has become rare. But it matters more than ever. Studies show that people feel more valued and connected when someone listens with their full attention. No glances at screens, no distracted nodding. Presence builds trust. It tells the other person, "You matter enough for me to pause everything else." That doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities or never checking your phone. It means being intentional. If you're with someone, silence the pings. If you're working, set blocks of focused time. If you're alone, let your mind wander without filling every gap. Because presence isn't just a courtesy, it's a cognitive choice, one that deepens connection, improves memory, and reduces stress. In a world designed to distract, choosing focus is a quiet form of rebellion. It says, "This moment deserves my full self." Not the fragmented version, not the half-here kind, but the one that notices, listens, and stays. Pass the praise and hold the fault. When something goes well, it's tempting to take the credit. When it goes wrong, the instinct is often the opposite, point somewhere else. But in strong relationships and effective leadership, the rule is simple. Pass the praise and hold the fault. Psychologically, this principle taps into how people respond to fairness, trust, and emotional safety. When someone takes credit for a group success without recognizing others, it triggers feelings of resentment and exclusion. But when a person shares praise generously, highlighting teammates, supporters, or collaborators, it strengthens connection and motivation. On the flip side, when things go poorly, holding the fault means taking ownership before shifting blame. This reflects what psychologists call internal locus of control, the belief that you're responsible for your actions, even in difficult outcomes. It's not about absorbing blame for everything. It's about being accountable for your part, especially when others might be watching how you respond under pressure. For example, in a workplace setting, a manager who says, "The team did a fantastic job, this was their win," builds morale. If something falls short and they say, "That's on me, I should have caught it earlier," they build credibility. Over time, this balance creates a culture where people feel safe to contribute and honest about mistakes. This approach also works in friendships, families, and communities. Giving someone credit for their effort while taking responsibility for your own missteps models emotional maturity. It shows that praise isn't a competition and that accountability isn't weakness. In psychology, these behaviors promote trust and cooperation. People remember who gave them credit and who stood up when things went sideways. And those small decisions in everyday interactions are what shape how you're seen, not just as capable, but as someone worth following. Kindness is doing, not offering. Most people want to be kind. They'll say things like, "Let me know if you need anything," or "I'm here if you want to talk." But in practice, those offers rarely turn into action. And that's what this idea gets at. Kindness is doing, not offering. From a psychological standpoint, offering kindness feels good to the giver. It checks a box. I said something supportive. But to the person on the receiving end, especially if they're stressed or struggling, a vague offer can feel like one more task to manage. It requires them to identify a need, find the right way to ask, and risk feeling like a burden. Kindness becomes more meaningful when it skips the offer stage and moves straight into something practical. If a friend is having a hard time, don't just say, "Let me know if you need anything." Show up with a meal, text them a playlist, water their plants. These small, concrete actions are easier to receive and far more impactful. Psychologically, this is tied to a concept called social friction, the little barriers that make it harder for someone to accept help. Vague offers create friction because they shift the work back onto the person who's already depleted. Doing something specific lowers that barrier completely. This principle also shows up in group settings. Saying someone should check in on them doesn't help as much as actually making the call. Words of support matter, but action delivers the real relief. Kindness that's visible, physical, and low pressure makes people feel genuinely cared for. And often, it's not the size of the gesture that matters. It's that someone noticed and acted without waiting to be asked. That's when kindness really lands. Rest is a strategy, not a reward. Most people treat rest like a reward, something you earn only after the work is done. But in psychology, rest isn't a luxury or a break from productivity. Rest is a strategy. This idea is based on how the brain and body handle sustained effort. When we work non-stop, especially under pressure, our focus, decision-making, and creativity all start to decline. That's because mental energy, like physical energy, isn't infinite. Cognitive fatigue sets in when we push too long without a pause, leading to mistakes, slower thinking, and burnout. In psychological research, short breaks, especially when taken before exhaustion hits, are shown to boost performance. Whether it's a few minutes away from your screen, a walk between meetings, or a full day off, rest improves the brain's ability to reset and refocus. This applies across environments. Athletes build rest into their training to recover and perform better. Musicians and surgeons use structured pauses to maintain precision. Yet in many work cultures, rest is still viewed as laziness or something to justify. Reframing rest as part of the process changes how we plan. It means putting recovery time into the schedule, not just filling every hour with effort. It's not about doing less, it's about doing smarter. A rested mind makes better decisions. It's more creative, more emotionally regulated, and more resilient. Rest also plays a key role in long-term motivation. When people treat it like fuel instead of a prize, they're more consistent over time. They don't wait until they've burned out to recharge. They build in recovery before they hit empty. In psychology and performance science alike, rest isn't what happens after the work is done. It's what makes the work possible. It's not the pause at the end. It's part of the system from the start. Spot potential, name it aloud. Sometimes a single comment sticks with you for years, not because it was flashy or loud, but because it caught something true. You're good at this. You've got something here. Those words matter, and that's the idea behind spot potential. Name it aloud. In psychology, this ties closely to the concept of positive reinforcement and self-efficacy. People often can't see their own potential clearly, especially when they're unsure, starting out, or stuck in self-doubt. When someone else notices a strength and says it out loud, it gives that quality shape. It makes it real. This doesn't mean empty flattery or generic praise. It means paying attention and being specific. For example, instead of saying "great job," it sounds more like, "You asked a really thoughtful question in that meeting. You have a real instinct for getting to the core of things." That kind of feedback is memorable because it's focused and believable. The psychology behind this is powerful. When you name someone's potential, it helps build their internal narrative, the story they tell themselves about what they're capable of. That narrative influences how much risk they take, how they handle setbacks, and how far they're willing to push themselves. This can happen in any context. A coach noticing leadership in a quiet athlete, a teacher seeing creativity in a student's project, a friend pointing out emotional insight in a conversation. These small recognitions don't just feel good, they guide development. And the timing matters. Often, potential is most visible when someone is still learning, not when they've mastered something. That's when a well-placed comment can create lasting momentum. Noticing is one thing, but naming it clearly and out loud gives it weight. It says, "I see this in you." And sometimes, that's what makes all the difference. Offer the last slice and mean it. You're at a dinner table with friends. There's one slice of pizza left. Everyone sees it. No one touches it. That last piece becomes more than food. It turns into a quiet social test. In psychology, this moment plays out through the lens of reciprocity norms and altruism. We're wired to notice acts of fairness, and offering someone the last slice, especially when it's something desirable, is a small but meaningful act of social generosity. It signals that you're prioritizing the group over yourself, not because you have to, but because you want to. But here's where it gets interesting. When you offer it and mean it, it lands differently. People can often detect hesitation or performative politeness. That awkward pause, that slow reach after saying, "You sure?" It tells others the offer came with strings. True generosity, even in tiny moments, is felt when it's clean. No guilt, no expectation of praise, just a genuine act of sharing. In behavioral studies, researchers often refer to this as costly signaling. The idea is that real generosity involves giving up something of value, not just offering what you didn't want anyway. And the last slice of pizza is a perfect low-stakes example of that. It's not about the slice, it's about the signal. These kinds of gestures quietly build trust. They teach people how you behave when no one's keeping score, and over time, they shape how you're remembered in a group. So when the last slice is sitting there and you say, "You can have it," if you really mean it, you're not just being nice. You're reinforcing the kind of culture people want to be part of. A culture of unspoken respect, shared space, and good faith. One small action that leaves a lasting impression. Laugh at yourself before anyone else can. You trip over your own feet in front of a crowd. It's awkward. Everyone sees it. But then you say, "And that's why I never became a dancer." Suddenly people laugh with you, not at you. That's the psychology behind laugh at yourself before anyone else can. This idea taps into a concept called self-deprecating humor, and when used thoughtfully, it's a powerful social tool. In psychology, it helps reduce embarrassment and build connection. When you acknowledge your own missteps with a bit of lightness, you take away the sting and the target. It signals confidence, not insecurity. Here's how it works. When you laugh at yourself, you're showing others that you're not fragile. That moment of self-awareness lowers social tension. People no longer have to tiptoe around your mistake or worry about how you'll react. You've already taken the pressure off. This is especially useful in moments that feel publicly uncomfortable. Misspeaking during a presentation, spilling something in a meeting, or fumbling through an answer. Making a quick joke or acknowledging the moment with humor creates psychological safety for you and for the people watching. But there's a balance. The goal isn't to insult yourself or constantly downplay your abilities. It's to show that you can be human without being defensive. The laughter isn't about shrinking. It's about owning the moment before it owns you. Psychologically, it's an act of emotional agility. You're flipping potential shame into shared amusement. And in many cases, it's this kind of honest, light-hearted response that builds trust, diffuses judgment, and turns awkwardness into relatability. People don't remember perfection. They remember how you handled the stumble. Timing matters more than truth. The truth can be solid, clear, and even helpful. But say it at the wrong moment, and it can land completely wrong. That's the idea behind timing matters more than truth. In psychology and everyday life, what you say often matters less than when you say it. It's not about lying or withholding important information. It's about understanding emotional readiness. When someone is overwhelmed, exhausted, or emotionally raw, they're often not in a state to process even the most reasonable feedback. In those moments, dropping a hard truth can feel more like an attack than support. Take this example. Right after someone receives bad news, you might feel the urge to offer perspective. Everything happens for a reason, or you'll come out stronger. These statements may be sincere, but when said too soon, they often come across as dismissive. The person isn't ready to zoom out, they're still in it. Psychologically, this is tied to emotional regulation. Our brains need time to calm down before we can process complex or abstract ideas. If you give people insight while they're still emotionally flooded, they won't absorb it. They'll just react. The same rule applies in conflict. Offering an honest critique right in the heat of an argument might be truthful, but it won't be useful. Waiting until both sides are calmer increases the chance that the message will be heard and understood. Knowing the right time to speak is a skill, and a powerful one. It means reading the emotional temperature of a moment, recognizing when someone's still processing, and choosing to wait instead of rushing in. Because even the most well-intended truth needs the right conditions to take root. Give presence, not just presence. Someone shows up with a perfectly wrapped gift, but as they hand it over, they're distracted, glancing at their phone, not quite listening. The gift might be appreciated, but what's missing is the thing that actually builds connection, their full attention. Give presence, not just presence, is about recognizing that attention is one of the most valuable forms of care. Psychologically, it signals validation. When someone puts down their devices, maintains eye contact, and responds thoughtfully, they're communicating, "You matter right now." It's easy to assume that gifts, objects, are the main currency of appreciation. And while they can be meaningful, research consistently shows that emotional attunement has a much deeper impact on relationship satisfaction. Presence communicates safety, it builds trust, and it allows people to feel truly seen. In everyday life, this might look like turning off notifications during dinner, not multitasking while someone shares something important, or simply staying with a conversation instead of mentally rehearsing your next reply. These small acts, though invisible, create emotional warmth that's hard to replicate with material items. Presence also has psychological effects for the giver. When you're fully engaged, your own stress levels drop, your empathy strengthens, and your sense of connection grows. Giving attention isn't just kind, it's regulating. That's why moments of true presence often stay with us longer than any physical gift. A memory of someone listening without judgment. A quiet afternoon where time didn't feel rushed. These experiences aren't just felt, they're stored. And long after the gift is forgotten, the presence remains. Compliments land best when they're spontaneous. A compliment that catches you off guard often sticks with you longer. It feels real, honest, maybe even a little surprising. That's the power of spontaneity. The idea that compliments land best when they're spontaneous comes from how people process sincerity. In psychology, we tend to trust feedback that feels unrehearsed. When a compliment seems planned, overly polished, or timed to impress, it can come across as strategic instead of sincere. Spontaneous compliments, by contrast, feel like natural thoughts that made it to the surface. You see someone solving a problem quickly and say, "That was smart thinking." Or during a conversation, you pause and say, "You explain things in such a clear way." These moments feel genuine because they weren't clearly designed to win favor. They just happened. This taps into something called perceived authenticity. When a compliment doesn't feel like it's trying to achieve anything, approval, attention, or influence, it's easier to trust. The brain responds positively to praise, but it responds better when it senses that praise wasn't manufactured. This also applies to timing. Compliments given immediately after noticing something feel more connected. Waiting too long or delivering praise in a scripted or routine way can dilute the impact. It feels like an obligation rather than a reflection of what someone actually noticed or appreciated. Spontaneity doesn't mean being careless, it means being present. The best compliments often come from actually paying attention, not from remembering to say something nice. And when people feel like you notice them in real time, not just out of politeness, they're more likely to remember it, believe it, and feel valued because of it. Check in twice, the second ask matters. In psychology, there's a concept called emotional masking. It's when people hide what they're feeling to appear composed, strong, or just to avoid uncomfortable attention. "I'm fine" is often a reflex, a quick way to signal, "I don't want to talk about this right now," or "I don't know how to explain it." The first time you ask, "How are you?" most people give the automatic answer, But when you check in a second time, calmly, kindly, and without pressure, it sends a different signal. It says, I actually care about the answer. That small act of asking again can be the difference between someone staying quiet and someone opening up. This doesn't mean pushing for details or demanding vulnerability. It means giving people permission to share more, if they want to. For example, after someone brushes off a first check-in, following up with, "Are you sure you're okay?" Or even, "If there's more going on, I'm here," lets them know the door isn't closed. This approach works because it creates psychological safety. The first ask tests the waters. The second ask shows consistency. It proves your concern wasn't just polite small talk. In both personal and professional relationships, people often remember who circled back. That second check-in tells them they're not invisible. And for someone who's struggling, knowing they're being seen, even just a little more closely, can make it easier to take the next step toward honesty, support, or simply feeling less alone. Assume error, never malice. A person cuts you off in traffic. Your first instinct? Probably anger. Maybe even the thought, they did that on purpose. But most of the time, they didn't. They just didn't see you. This idea, assume error, not malice, is a simple but powerful mindset shift. In psychology, it's tied to something called the fundamental attribution error, our tendency to blame others' actions on their character rather than their circumstances. When someone's late to a meeting, we might think they're lazy. If they miss a message, we think they're ignoring us. But more often than not, the cause is something mundane: traffic, stress, forgetfulness. Not a personal slight, just a human slip. Assuming error doesn't mean being naive or ignoring patterns of behavior. It just means that our default explanation should leave room for imperfection, not ill intent. This mental shift lowers unnecessary tension. It slows reactive judgments. And it can prevent small misunderstandings from turning into big conflicts. In practice, it looks like pausing before responding, giving someone the benefit of the doubt, saying, maybe they didn't realize, instead of, they knew exactly what they were doing. It's a habit that requires restraint, but it builds resilience in relationships. Whether with co-workers, family, or strangers, this principle invites curiosity instead of confrontation. Humans make mistakes constantly. That's not cynicism, it's reality. But if we treat every slip-up as an attack, we burn bridges before we even understand what happened. Assuming error first doesn't excuse everything, but it gives us space to see more clearly, and often to respond with more grace. Let one car in. Civilization survives another day. You're crawling through bumper-to-bumper traffic, late for something, tension building. Then, someone signals to merge. You hesitate. Do you let them in or tighten the gap? It's a tiny moment, but in psychology, this kind of decision carries surprising weight. Let one car in. Civilization survives another day. It's a funny way to say something serious. Small acts of cooperation keep social order intact. This idea ties into what psychologists call pro-social behavior, choices made to benefit others, often with no direct payoff. When you let a car in, you're not earning money or gaining status, but you're reinforcing a culture of trust. And in crowded cities or stressful commutes, that trust is easy to erode and hard to rebuild. Psychologically, letting someone in activates empathy-based decision-making. It signals that you recognize another person's presence and need, even if it mildly inconveniences you. This kind of action taps into what social scientists call reciprocity norms. the expectation that kindness will eventually be returned, even if not immediately. Interestingly, studies show that witnessing or performing small prosocial acts can lower stress. It gives the brain a sense of control and meaning. And when people observe others being courteous, like yielding a lane, they're more likely to do the same. It becomes self-reinforcing. This applies far beyond traffic, holding a door, letting someone speak, giving space on a crowded sidewalk. These aren't just manners, they're micro-investments in shared dignity, and each one nudges our environment a little closer to civility. So while letting one car in might seem trivial, psychology sees it as part of a bigger picture, a quiet reminder that how we act in small moments shapes the kind of world we're building, one merge at a time. Voice notes beat texts for complex tone. A simple "sure" in a text can mean 10 different things: excitement, sarcasm, resentment, indifference. The words don't change, but the tone does everything. That's where voice notes come in. When a message is emotionally layered or context-sensitive, tone becomes essential. And text, as convenient as it is, strips away most of that nuance. Psychologists call it paralinguistic communication, the pitch, pace, volume, and rhythm that add meaning to what we say. These subtle vocal cues are lost when we reduce complex emotions to flat characters on a screen. That's why something intended as playful might come off as cold, or a message meant to reassure could feel abrupt. Voice notes restore that missing layer. They let warmth come through, or softness, or seriousness, the sigh before a sentence, the pause after a difficult word. All of it shapes how the message lands, especially in moments of tension, vulnerability, or ambiguity. Hearing someone's actual voice can prevent misunderstandings before they spiral. It signals effort, care, and presence. It says, "This moment matters enough to speak out loud." Of course, not every message needs one. But when the content is complex, when emotions are mixed or timing is delicate, voice can do what text can't. It creates connection, even from a distance. In digital communication, clarity isn't just about choosing the right words. It's about delivering the right feeling. And when the stakes are high or the meaning is layered, your voice is often the better vehicle. It carries not just information, but intention. And in psychology, that's what makes all the difference. Decline like you'd want to be declined. Nobody likes being told no, but how it's said makes all the difference. That's the idea behind decline like you'd want to be declined. In psychology, it's a principle rooted in empathy and social reciprocity, treating others the way you'd want to be treated when roles are reversed. A decline doesn't have to be harsh, dismissive, or awkward. In fact, a thoughtful no can actually strengthen trust because it shows honesty with care. It's not just about saying no, it's about how you say it. When someone asks for help, time, or inclusion, and you can't say yes, the delivery matters. A vague or abrupt "I can't" can feel like rejection of the person, not just the request, but a response like, "I really appreciate you thinking of me. Right now, I can't commit, but I'd love to be involved another time," delivers the same message with clarity and respect. This applies across situations, work, friendships, invitations. Declining with warmth and specificity shows that you're not avoiding the person, just the task or timing. Psychologically, this helps preserve relational trust. The sense that even when boundaries are drawn, the connection still matters. And it works in reverse too. When you decline kindly, you model how you'd want someone to respond to your own requests. This sets a tone for mutual understanding in future interactions. From a behavioral perspective, practicing thoughtful declines also helps reduce people-pleasing patterns. It proves that boundaries don't have to be cold or guilt-ridden. They can be clear and compassionate. Ultimately, saying no is part of life. But when done with empathy and respect, it becomes more than a refusal. It becomes a message of mutual dignity. And that's something people remember far more than the no itself. Step aside without being asked. You don't need a sign to know when you're standing in the way. Whether it's at a subway exit, a store entrance, or just a crowded sidewalk, learning to step aside without being asked is one of the simplest forms of social intelligence. This behavior reflects what's known in psychology as pro-social behavior. Actions intended to benefit others, even in small, everyday ways. It's not about grand gestures. It's about recognizing shared space and adjusting yourself so that others can move more freely. It might seem minor, but the mental skill behind it is called situational awareness. Situational awareness means noticing what's happening around you, who's trying to pass, who looks rushed, or how much space you're taking up. When you move without being asked, you're not just being polite. You're reducing the mental load on others. They don't have to speak up, navigate around you, or feel uncomfortable. You've already solved the problem they were silently facing. This small move also activates something called reciprocal altruism. People who witness or benefit from these unnoticed kindnesses are more likely to pay it forward. One step aside can set off a chain of social cooperation. It's not about being overly self-conscious. It's about tuning into your environment and recognizing that everyone's trying to get somewhere. Social harmony often hinges on these unsaid, low-effort choices. Stepping aside isn't dramatic. It doesn't earn applause, but it creates ease, preserves flow, and shows you're aware of others. Something that makes public spaces feel just a bit more civil. Learn the lesson before labeling the day bad. Some days just don't go your way. You spill coffee, miss a deadline, argue with someone you care about, and by noon you've already decided, this is a bad day. But psychology suggests a more useful habit. Learn the lesson before labeling the day bad. This idea connects to how the brain processes experience. When something negative happens, we tend to apply a sweeping judgment. It's called cognitive filtering, focusing on what went wrong and using it to define the entire day. But this pattern can lead to unnecessary stress, pessimism, and even burnout. The alternative is cognitive reappraisal, stepping back, noticing the situation, and asking what it's trying to teach you. Instead of saying, "This day is ruined," you might say, "That conversation didn't go well. Maybe I need to rethink how I approached it." The focus shifts from labeling the day to extracting insight from it. Here's how it works in practice. You mess up a presentation at work. Rather than letting it ruin your mood for hours, you pause and ask what could help next time. Prepping earlier, slowing down, or clarifying your message. That small shift from judgment to learning changes how the rest of the day unfolds. Psychologically, this technique helps reduce rumination, the loop of negative thoughts that can intensify stress. It also builds resilience, your ability to bounce back from setbacks by reframing how you see them. A day with a setback isn't automatically a bad day. It's a day with feedback. And by learning from what went wrong before labeling the entire experience, you build a more balanced view of both yourself and your circumstances. It's a small habit, but one that makes emotional balance a little easier to hold on to, especially when everything feels off track. Share clouds as often as sunshine. When something good happens, it's easy to share. A new job, a funny story, a vacation photo, it all flows naturally. But when things feel heavy or uncertain, most people hesitate. They keep it in. not wanting to bring others down. That's where this idea comes in. Share clouds as often as sunshine. In psychology, this connects to emotional openness and authentic self-disclosure. The ability to share a full range of feelings, not just the positive ones. Many people filter what they share, thinking only good news is acceptable in conversation. But that pattern creates emotional gaps. It can leave people feeling isolated, even when they're surrounded by others. When someone only sees the highlight reel, it sets an unspoken expectation that they should do the same. This limits real connection. In contrast, when people share what's hard, stress at work, self-doubt, or just a rough day, it creates space for more honest relationships. It doesn't mean oversharing or turning every conversation into a therapy session. It means allowing yourself to say, actually, today's been kind of tough, and trusting that it's okay to be heard without a solution. That kind of small honesty makes it easier for others to do the same. Psychologically, this also models emotional safety. It shows that all feelings, positive and negative, are valid in a shared space. Over time, it helps reduce stigma around expressing vulnerability and builds deeper trust within personal and social circles. Real support works both ways. If we only share joy, we limit how supported we can feel when things are hard. Sharing the clouds doesn't take away the sunshine. It just makes the full picture more real, and that's where connection starts to grow. Coach in private, praise in public. Nobody likes to be called out in front of a group, even when the feedback is well-meaning. But almost everyone appreciates being recognized when others are watching. That's the psychology behind coach in private, praise in public. This idea is built on two core emotional needs: dignity and recognition. In psychology, criticism, no matter how constructive, can trigger a threat response when delivered in front of others. It feels exposing, even humiliating, because it activates concerns about social status and belonging. When coaching or correcting someone, doing it in private protects those emotional needs. It creates a space where the person can reflect, ask questions, and improve without feeling judged by a larger audience. Whether it's a manager giving feedback to an employee, a teacher guiding a student, or a friend pointing out a pattern, privacy allows for honesty without embarrassment. On the flip side, public praise builds morale. It reinforces behavior and shows others what's valued, all while giving the person a moment of visible appreciation. This kind of recognition strengthens trust, boosts motivation, and increases what psychologists call social reinforcement, when others notice and respond to positive behavior. Here's a simple example. A team member handles a client situation well. You could quietly thank them, or you could mention it during the next team meeting. That public moment not only reinforces their confidence, but also sets an example for others. Used together, these two habits, private coaching and public praise, create a balance of accountability and encouragement. They protect people's self-respect while reinforcing progress. And in any setting where people are learning, performing, or growing, that balance can turn average relationships into high-trust, high-functioning teams. Don't tease someone who's already shrinking. Some jokes land, others hit like a quiet slap. Teasing might seem harmless, just part of how people bond. But when someone's already feeling small, self-conscious, or unsure, that same joke can echo louder than intended, and instead of bringing connection, it creates distance. This idea, don't tease someone who's already shrinking, points to a basic truth of social dynamics. Context matters more than content. A comment that's funny in one setting can be painful in another, especially when it reinforces the very thing someone is trying to hide or recover from. Psychologically, people who feel insecure or exposed are already in a defensive mental state. Their stress response is subtly activated, and their internal voice is often running critical commentary. A well-meaning tease about their mistake, their hesitation, or their silence doesn't challenge that voice. It amplifies it. You'll often see this in group settings. Someone stumbles through a story, and instead of support, they get a joke at their expense. Laughter follows, but their shoulders tighten. They shrink a little more. The group doesn't always notice, but they do. What makes teasing feel safe is reciprocity and emotional balance. When someone feels grounded and included, they can laugh at themselves because it doesn't feel like a threat. But when someone is already withdrawing socially, emotionally, or physically, a joke about them isn't banter, it's pressure. Psychological safety depends on knowing when to lean in and when to ease off, and noticing when someone is already pulling away is a sign of empathy, not oversensitivity, because the goal isn't to toughen them up. It's to make space where they don't have to be tough at all. If it's not yours, don't take it. If it's private, don't share it. You see a phone left behind on a table, or you hear a private story shared in a moment of trust. In both cases, you have a choice. Psychology tells us these are more than moral decisions. They're reflections of how we understand boundaries, identity, and respect. The idea is simple. If it's not yours, don't take it. If it's private, don't share it. But the psychology behind it runs deep. At its core is the concept of ownership psychology, the mental and emotional framework we use to determine what belongs to us and what doesn't. This includes physical items, but also ideas, stories, emotions, and even reputations. When someone shares something personal, they're making themselves vulnerable. That act builds psychological trust, which forms the basis of close relationships. Breaking that trust by sharing something without permission can trigger feelings of betrayal. It's not just about gossip, it's about violating someone's sense of control over their identity. The same logic applies to tangible things. Taking something that's not yours, even if it seems small, can harm another person's sense of psychological security, the feeling that their space, belongings, or boundaries are safe. Research shows that these kinds of violations, whether emotional or material, can lead to long-term rifts in both professional and personal relationships. There's also the matter of self-concept. When people act with integrity in unseen moments, choosing not to take what isn't theirs or to protect what isn't theirs to share, they reinforce their internal values. Over time, those choices build a stronger, more consistent identity. Respect isn't just about big gestures. It shows up in small, everyday moments, especially when there's no one around to enforce it. Apologize without a paragraph. When you've hurt someone, whether it was a misstep, a sharp word, or something you didn't mean, your instinct might be to explain, to go into detail, to clarify everything. But often, the longer the apology, the harder it is to hear. Apologize without a paragraph is about keeping the focus on accountability, not justification. In psychology, apologies are most effective when they validate the other person's experience and acknowledge harm. The moment you start adding reasons, backstory, or disclaimers, the apology starts sounding like a defense. A simple, "I'm sorry I hurt you, that wasn't okay," goes a lot further than, "I'm sorry, but I was tired, and you caught me at a bad time, and I didn't mean it the way it sounded." The second version feels more like an explanation than an apology, and it subtly shifts the spotlight away from the person who was hurt. That doesn't mean context isn't important. It just doesn't belong in the opening move. Leading with a clean, direct apology communicates that you're not trying to soften the impact or dodge responsibility. This also applies in everyday situations. If you're late to a meeting, saying, "Sorry I kept you waiting," is clearer and more respectful than launching into traffic details or your morning routine. It shows you're tuned in to the effect, not just the cause. Psychologically, short and sincere apologies are easier to trust. They allow space for the other person to respond, rather than making them sit through your reasoning. And most of the time, people aren't asking for a full explanation. They just want to know that you get it, and that you care enough to own it. That's what makes the difference. Try to play positive sum games only. Some interactions feel like a battle. One person wins, the other loses. But not every situation has to be a tug of war. The idea of a positive sum game flips that mindset. In simple terms, it's any situation where more than one person can benefit, where value isn't just shifted, but actually created. And in real life, these moments happen more often than we think. Think of two co-workers collaborating on a project. If they compete for credit, it's a zero-sum game. One comes out ahead, the other behind. But if they genuinely support each other, combine their strengths, and make the project better together, that's a positive sum outcome. The team wins. They both shine. The client's happier. No one had to lose for the other to succeed. This isn't just workplace logic. It applies to friendships, negotiations, communities. Positive sum thinking means shifting from "what can I get" to "what can we grow?" That change rewires how we approach problems, how we listen, how we invest in others. It trains us to look for alignment instead of leverage. Psychologically, people thrive in environments where mutual gain is possible. Trust increases. Creativity flows more freely. And cooperation isn't just about being nice. It becomes the most rational strategy. People begin to see that building something together beats winning something alone. It's not always possible. There are still moments that require firm boundaries or personal wins. But when you can, and especially when it's not obvious, choosing the positive sum approach often leads to more than expected for everyone involved. Let people arrive at their own speed. Some people warm up right away. Others take a little longer to feel safe, to feel seen, or to feel ready. And when we expect everyone to move at the same pace, we end up mistaking hesitation for disinterest or quietness for avoidance. The idea behind "let people arrive at their own speed" is rooted in an understanding of individual processing styles and emotional safety. In psychology, this can relate to differences in attachment styles, social anxiety, or even introversion versus extroversion. Some individuals naturally ease into new spaces slowly, not because they don't care, but because they're calibrating. It's easy to overlook this in fast-paced environments. In group settings, the loudest voice often gets the most attention. In conversations, the quickest reply is seen as engagement. But emotional presence doesn't always show up on a stopwatch. Sometimes it looks like silence before trust, or observation before participation. A common misstep is trying to force connection on a timeline, asking someone to just open up already, or nudging them to be more involved. But that rarely speeds things up. In fact, it often pushes people further back. What works better is patience paired with presence, making room, staying available, showing you're there without demanding they match your energy immediately. You might see this play out in a new teammate who stays on the edge of the conversation for weeks, then suddenly jumps in with a great idea, or a friend who listens closely for months before sharing anything personal. Their pace isn't a flaw, it's part of how they build security. Psychological safety isn't built on pressure, it's built on space. And when people feel free to arrive at their own speed, they tend to show up more fully when they're finally ready. Say goodbye like it might be remembered. You're walking out the door, keys in hand, and someone calls out, "Bye." You respond, barely turning your head. Later. Seems small, but that moment might stick longer than you think. Psychologists call this the recency effect. The idea that people tend to remember the last part of an experience more vividly than the middle. In social interactions, this means your goodbye often carries more emotional weight than you realize. Whether it's ending a phone call, leaving a party, or saying goodbye before a trip, that final moment leaves an imprint. This concept also overlaps with closure theory. Goodbyes mark the end of a connection, at least for that moment, and our minds naturally seek resolution. If the goodbye is cold or careless, it can leave someone feeling unsettled, even if the rest of the interaction was warm. And it's not just about grand farewells. A short but intentional "take care, I'm really glad we talked" can feel genuine and complete. It doesn't need to be dramatic, just thoughtful. A goodbye done well respects the conversation that came before it. It says, "This mattered." In workplace psychology, exit interactions are studied closely. Leaders who thank people for their effort, even when they're leaving a company, are remembered more positively, and those partings often set the tone for long-term professional relationships. The bottom line? Whether it's a 5-minute chat or a long visit, the final words you choose matter. They help shape how the whole exchange is remembered. A little warmth at the end can elevate everything that came before it. So when it's time to leave, don't just exit. Land the goodbye. Make it intentional, because sometimes the last thing you say becomes the thing they remember longest. Treat your future self as a friend you care about. It's easy to leave dishes in the sink or skip the early bedtime thinking, "I'll deal with it tomorrow." But in psychology, there's a smarter mindset. Treat your future self as a friend you care about. This concept is rooted in future self-continuity, the idea of how connected we feel to the person we'll be in the days, months, or years ahead. When that connection is strong, we make better decisions. We invest more in our health, goals, and responsibilities. Not out of guilt, but out of consideration. Imagine a close friend was going to inherit your current situation tomorrow. Your to-do list, your mess, your commitments. You'd probably want to make it a little easier for them. That's the principle here. Act with the same care toward your future self. Psychologically, people who view their future self as someone else tend to procrastinate more and make short-term choices that lead to long-term stress. But when you see that future version of yourself as real and worth helping, your behavior changes. You take 5 extra minutes to prep for the morning. You stretch, hydrate, and rest. Not because it's urgent now, but because you know someone. You will appreciate it later. This mindset can also reduce regret. It bridges the gap between impulse and intention. It reminds us that long-term well-being isn't built in dramatic gestures. It's built in small, consistent acts of kindness toward the person you'll be tomorrow. By treating your future self like a friend, not a stranger you leave problems for, you start creating systems that are sustainable. That shift in perspective, though simple, rewires how we think about effort, time, and self-care. It turns every choice into a chance to take better care of the person who'll benefit most, the next version of you.